Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. This week we have on Dr. Erik Won, who was overseeing my brain performance workouts that I did this past spring. I was sharing it all on the socials, and all of you guys were asking, what the heck is a brain workout? So I wanted to bring him on the podcast to talk all about it, brain workouts, brain performance, and he gives some amazing tools that you can implement right now in the next 24 hours after listening to this episode to start optimizing your brain health. And why I'm so passionate to have Dr. Won on today is because a lot of people may not know this, but our brains are muscles and they too can be worked. And a lot of the times we go around suffering with anxiety, depression, lack of focus, lack of patience, having difficult times sleeping, among many other symptoms. But we don't have to continue to be that way. We can change that once we know and have a look in what's going on inside our brain. We can start addressing those issues. So, in this episode, we talk about the brain scans that I had done when I had first gone into their clinic, where the EEG readings and what it was saying about my brain. Essentially, I was having two alpha peaks where I was having conflicting alpha brainwaves, meaning that there were 2 points in which my brain was processing information, and that caused me to lack focus. It caused me to constantly bounce between a fast operating brain and a very slow. And a lot of things can cause slow brain waves, a lot of trauma, a lot of accidents that we can go through. But it doesn't have to be that way. So we go into that a lot on the episode. And Dr. Won is just an amazing, incredible man. He has such a big resume. He is the chief medical officer at Wave Neuroscience, which is where I started working with Dr. Won. He's also a neuroscientist, Harvard residency trained. He was a former Navy flight surgeon, the former chief physician and chief technology officer for the Boeing company. And over at Wave Neuroscience, he specializes in optimizing brain function. And it's helping people, whether people are trying to recover from accidents, post-traumatic stress, or they're just looking to optimize their brain as a muscle and increase their brain performance. There's so much about the brain that we are now discovering, and we talk all about it on this week's episode. So I hope you guys enjoy. But before we dive into that conversation, I want to give a little update in my life and what's been going on. As you guys know, I'm doing my bikini prep show and I'm tracking my meals, I'm scheduling my workouts. And next week, I'm headed to Hawaii for a family vacation. We're actually going because it's my birthday, Miles's birthday, and I wanted to set this trip as a reward for my 90-day planning of launching this podcast, launching the RxL community, and having Hawaii as our reward for that hard work that I put into building this company, building this launch, and bringing you guys along for it. And that was just a way to reward myself. So that happens next week. And inside our RxL community, we've officially kicked off the Strong Body, Stronger Mind Challenge, where we're combining movement with learning. And we are featuring Jenna Kuchar's book, How Are You Really? And it is going so great. It is so amazing to be inspiring women to be getting up and moving their body, getting out in the natural light, and feeding their mind. And we're doing it all together as a community. So if you're not yet a member of RxL, come join us, come reign over your life, and let's do it together. All right, with that, let's dive into the episode. All right, Dr. Won, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you today too. It's very much my pleasure and honor.
Yeah, well, how I like to open up this segment with our guests is, this is the Reign Over Your Life podcast. And I always like to ask, what is one area of your life that you are currently committed to reigning over?
Oh, well, it's a great question, and I would say professionally, a big part of our goal and our mission is to bring this technology and good brain health to the masses and make this as accessible as possible to vulnerable communities and populations. And so, I would say top of mind, that would be what I'm trying to reign over at the moment.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, let's dive right into the brain because I know you're so passionate about it. You've really dedicated your career to empowering people about how they can optimize their brain health. So, can you share with us what is it about the brain that we're now beginning to just uncover?
Yeah, well, this is really one of the most exciting areas of both medicine and science, I would say, is this emerging knowledge and evidence base around neuroscience and biological foundations for both brain health and injury. And our unique approach, we can dive into a lot of that, but what we're doing is we're getting a quick neuroimage. It's a brain scan or a brain map called quantitative EEG, and functionally, this is looking at how the different areas of the brain are speaking to each other. And even this, I think, has been made much more accessible and friendly. It used to be a very long and lengthy study to get. We now have a device that has good signal quality, and it's all dry lead technology, meaning you don't get a lot of goop in your hair or anything like that. And so we're able to very quickly and easily capture these brain images, and then we're generating a report that people can understand and relate to. That's been another part of our effort, is making this digestible and understandable. And so we've transformed what I think is some very complex neuroscience into some metrics people can quickly and easily understand. And then the last piece to that is, if we do see areas of disruption, areas that may not be working as well as they could, we're able to use a couple of different modalities and technologies to improve those areas of dysfunction and optimize them to come back into a healthier status. And so that's our whole process. And I know it's a lot to take in, but we've seen some really promising results using that
Oh my gosh.
methodology.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. What I want to do for all the listeners is I want to walk them through how we met and how you and I have worked together doing brain scans, doing brain workouts for me to move through my postpartum kind of brain fog, to increase my memory, increase my focus. I'd love to even talk about my scans if you have those, because I would love to show them and share them with our audience. The success that I've had through training my brain, because I think I was sharing it on socials and everyone's like, brain workouts, what is that? So essentially, before I ask that question, I want to just to kind of guide listeners through our history. So I was walking my dogs out in Cardiff back when I lived out in Cardiff by the sea, and I kept seeing the sign for wave neural, and it was, brain workouts, and I'm like, optimize your brain. I'm like, this is so intriguing. And one day I just decided to walk in and got to chatting with Stacy and heard about the technology that you guys have to optimize brain, but most importantly to really look and see what's going on in the brain, how's it functioning. And I did my scan, and coming out of it, I was blown away because my entire personality was spoken back to me of exactly how what goes on in my brain people could actually see and tell me. So I was so fascinated. So can we walk through a little bit about what initially is a brain scan, because I know a lot of people may not know you can get an analysis of what's going on in your brain.
It's really interesting how much this area of neuroscience has evolved. And so we're really looking at the electrophysiologic health of the brain. And this is something we call oscillatory function. Kind of behind the scenes, your brain is always working and it's sending communications throughout the different areas, whether it's your visual cortex or your motor cortex. There's these neural circuits that are always operating. And what we're looking for is something called your alpha frequency, which is functionally sort of the refresh rate of your brain. Is typically we see people between 8 and 13 hertz, which means we're encoding information 8 to 13 times per second. This has been studied for decades. It's pretty well understood. And what we can now observe are areas that may be misfiring. And so if your dominant alpha frequency were, say, 11.4 hertz, which is pretty fast, but we see an area, let's say in the prefrontal cortex, that may be firing, let's say at 5 hertz. That information mismatch may manifest as symptoms. And because that specific area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is executive function, the individual may feel lethargic, not want to get out of bed, and lack motivation. And in a separate scenario, if somebody's visual cortex is overactive, let's say firing at 30 hertz, and the rest of the brain is still at 11 hertz, this information mismatch, they're scanning their environment 30 times per second, and they can only process at 11. There's this information overload that may manifest as anxiety. And so just these brain maps tell us a lot about how people are experiencing their world. And we're able to sort of take that journey together and explain what we're seeing through objective, now clinical grade studies. And I think that's really informative and empowering to people to understand sort of what's happening. And just to share a little bit of a personal story with my son, who's grown up to be just a wonderful young man. He's just started college, but when he was younger, we got a scan, and the neuroscientist had shared with me that he's a little bit slow in his fine motor dexterity. And it sort of made a light bulb go off with my wife and I. We both grew up playing the piano, and my son sort of struggled with this, and it gave us permission to sort of let him grow at his own pace. And, because we were butting heads a little bit, just practice more, work harder. And really this was just his natural development was a little bit different. And they had let us know, it's going to mature and grow just fine. But right at this moment, it's a little bit slower than we want it to be. And so those little, I think, data points of information that we can glean from these scans can really inform us both of where we are or where family members are, but importantly, how we might work together and partner to improve function and improve quality of life.
Can you tell us the difference between what a personality of someone who would have a lower hertz, like brainwave functioning? I know you said like someone higher would definitely be dealing with information overload, anxiety, and someone on the lower end would look a little more maybe going through a depression. Yeah. Can you just specify a little bit more where someone might be able to point out and be like, oh, that's me?
Yeah, it's a great question because, as a species, we have so much diversity. And one of the things I always want to share up front is that there's really no perfect brain. We look at some people and we admire certain qualities about them, but, individuals who may have certain strengths, it may lend itself not as well to other areas. And just as an example, we're not just looking at the speed that the brain can process information. We're also looking at different dimensionalities, one of which we call coherence, which is how well do the different areas of the brain speak to each other, how many drop messages are there in a manner of speaking. And so, even people who may have faster brains, if they have poor coherence, that can manifest as a certain cluster of symptoms. But what we're usually looking for are really significant deviations from this dominant waveform pattern that we're looking for. And typically, we're looking for something more than 2 standard deviations from their norm, sort of age and gender matched norms. And when we see that, very predictably, they may be experiencing a certain cluster of symptoms. And so the EEG, there have been good studies demonstrating it's got pretty good sensitivity and specificity at identifying everything from depression to attention deficit disorder. And so over time, it's become more and more widely adopted as a tool and an instrument to inform conversations for mental health specialists and even primary care doctors. And so that part's exciting. I think we're moving away from a lot of the more qualitative discussions into an age where we can be much more objective about our brain health. And truly, I think we are entering sort of the digital age when it comes to brain health and being able to examine and interrogate sort of what's going on and why might we be experiencing some of the things that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and what it seems is that the work that you're doing is that we're doing an EEG scan to see what's going on in our brain, but that doesn't mean we have to continue with that. The brain is a muscle that can be worked. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why
Yeah,
that's so exciting?
yeah, yeah. It's a brilliant observation, and um, we've learned over years, and one of the real important paradigms in medicine is that we've been engineered to be healing organisms. And whether you put two ends of a broken bone together or two ends of a wound margin together, these tend to heal. And the brain is really no exception. Sometimes it just gets stuck, and we need to give it sort of this friendly nudge in the right direction.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is providing some entrainment to the brain by utilizing brain stimulation and reinforcing that alpha frequency that we were talking about. And if we do that daily, similar to a workout, we see these waveform patterns change over time and start to merge together. And we gradually see amelioration of many symptoms. And what's been interesting is part of our mission has been to reshape this conversation away from mental illness and start talking more about mental wellness and optimization. And in our mind, this is a much healthier conversation to have. And so while we very frequently take care of cases of depression and anxiety, and in particular, we've had a growing number of post-traumatic stress cases, we're also working towards optimization for people who um, may be subclinical. And it's been interesting. We've had this growing population of individuals working towards human performance. So there's this human performance element that has really been gaining traction. And so we see a lot of elite athletes. We see CEOs of hugely successful corporations, a lot of folks from the special operations and military community. And so it's sort of taken on this really interesting kind of new life that it's no longer something that is limited to people who may be struggling with a variety of different conditions, although that is really the birth and the genesis of where this technology came from. But can we optimize brain function or restore function? And it appears to us there are some important ways in which we can improve upon people who are doing very well. And probably the area that is generating the most excitement is we're seeing improvements in some reaction times, but also quality of sleep. And that's really become a focus in a number of areas, but athletic trainers, human performance specialists, and in the medical realm, doctors who are focused on longevity and neuroscience. There's been a lot of emerging data really highlighting and illustrating the critical importance of sleep.
Mm.
So those are some of the areas that have really become areas of intense interest and research.
Wow, that's really fascinating, especially about longevity.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really fascinating dealing with your brain. But I mean, the brain's such an important part of our body that I feel, I know initially coming in and doing my treatments with you, nowhere else had been having these conversations about ways I can optimize my brain, increase my focus. And I think so much of our culture is focused on fixing symptoms, like taking a pill or taking a supplement or like quick fixes. But we really need to go inward and really work within and look at that body part as a whole. And I know when I initially came to you guys, I was really wanting to uncover. I was just really beginning my trauma recovery journey and looking a lot back on my childhood and acknowledging areas of my life that were complete blackouts that I don't remember, that I have very fuzzy memories. And I want to talk about the effects of trauma on the brain and how that can impact someone's life.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is um, I think what we're touching on now is being a part of this healing journey that we're all
Mhm.
on. And trauma is much more prevalent than I think is currently understood. The current estimates by the CDC are that there's globally about 300 million cases of post-traumatic stress and
Wow.
varying levels of severity. Um, but it reminds me of, there's this, well, first, the physiologic changes that we see with post-traumatic stress are pretty well documented now. So we see disruptions in some of the neural circuits, particularly in the prefrontal cortex that we were mentioning. Um, and interestingly, in some of the more severe chronic cases, we can see diminished volume of the hippocampus, which is one of the areas involved in emotional regulation
Mm,
and resilience. And so
mm.
uh, exposure
Important
to chronic,
muscles.
yeah, exactly. And so chronic unremitting stress can have some physiologic impacts, but the good news is we have agency and the ability to impart some change on that. And so I think there's a lot of new emerging science, not just from our organization, but from many other areas, where in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see some real innovation and breakthroughs in terms of how do we handle this. And one of the areas, this is kind of getting into a more in-depth conversation, but there was a discovery maybe 7, 8 years ago that the reward center of the brain and the pain center of the brain are interestingly co-located. And when we think about our lives, that tends to line up. When you're experiencing great joy and euphoria, many times you forget about your pain. And when you're feeling extreme pain in the greatest depths of our depression or desperation, we forget any inkling of joy. And
Mm-hmm.
so this area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex is fairly binary, right? And so what's been interesting is that when we think about our daily lives, a lot of the delayed gratification that we grew up with, we used to really have to work for, whether it was farming or hunting, there was effort that went into a lot of the rewards that we received in life. But especially with social media, there's now much more instant gratification. We don't have to work quite as hard as we used to. And so much of the resilience that was built into our upbringing, that's not as socialized into our current day. And so um, yeah, the areas that are really starting to emerge in terms of um, some sophisticated knowledge of how the brain is working are, we're starting to illuminate both, these pain pleasure circuits, but also if they're overactive or underactive, how might we work together to address that and to normalize function. And, we've talked a lot about different techniques, whether it's yoga or meditation. Certainly, good diet and exercise is really critical to that. But you mentioned this brain workout, being able to use personalized protocols to modulate brain activity. This is really sort of the next era, and I think technological innovation to help with that.
I would love to dive into that a little bit more of what a treatment program, what my treatment, we can talk about my treatment program, what that would look like for someone who's like, this sounds so fascinating. What are they talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we touched on sort of these three steps of we get a brain map, we run it through computational analytics, and we customize a protocol to each individual. And um, this is really, I think, foundational in the sense that it's helping to optimize brain function. What I think was really interesting and fascinating to follow along with your case, and I hope it's okay to share this, but
Of course.
um,
Yes.
yeah, you were adding to this a lot of positive reinforcement, and you had a lot of the good lifestyle behaviors that we want to see, such as a very healthy and clean diet. You were very diligent about your exercise routine. But the part that I thought was really intelligent was just when you were getting these treatments, you had mentioned you were trying to envision both your short and long term goals. And I mean, there is something very empowering about that just by itself. But adding that sort of mindfulness Gratitude is another very common technique. There's very good academically rigorous studies showing exercising gratitude. It can be a gratitude diary or just prayer or meditation, but
Mhm.
being thankful for the gifts that we have is important. And I think you were actually exercising that through the treatment as well. And so there's no reason we need
Yes.
to limit ourselves to one or two things. We can certainly approach this as a combination therapy and multiple modalities and stack things to our benefit. And I think that's really where the future is as well.
That's incredible. And I know to kind of walk someone through a process, what it looks like is you go in for about 30-ish minutes, depending on your treatment. And about every 45 seconds, there's like a 5-second magnetize effect where can you explain what that process is?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Because I
so,
just know what it feels like on my brain.
yeah, yeah. So when I first heard magnet, I became very skeptical. I wasn't, you hear about these little trinkets and toys that are supposed to help, and this is not that at all. It's actually an MRI grade 1.8 Tesla magnetic coil that is delivering pulses of energy to what's called an evoked potential. It triggers the neurons to fire. And the first order principles of physics, we frequently, there's an emerging field we call neurophysics. Um, these magnets can actually deliver energy across a solid barrier. And if you've ever played with magnets, there's some unique properties to it. But we have our skull is a 1 centimeter barrier between the outside world and our brain, and this transcranial magnetic stimulation or TMS coil can importantly use those first order principles of physics to cause the neurons underneath it within our brain to actually fire and to behave in a manner that is advantageous to ourselves. That's functionally the workout. We're asking these neurons to fire at a
Yeah.
cadence that we're prescribing. And so it's not at all one of these toys or trinkets. It's a very sophisticated and an FDA approved tool it's FDA approved for depression. And so we're using it in some cases in an off-label manner to optimize brain function. And so that's really what you had experienced is
Okay.
the tapping that you feel. And most of our patients tell us it's not painful. It's more of a tapping sensation,
Not painful at all.
and that's
Yeah.
functionally how we're imparting the changes that we're targeting is through this TMS magnetic coil.
So cool. I want to talk about my results. Do you remember my initial results?
I do, and this
So,
is where we typically wouldn't share this. With your permission, you're welcome to.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you for the doctor patient confidentiality, but we're laying it all out on the table.
sure, sure. So you're welcome to share, and I can add to it however you want to.
Yeah, that'd be great. So let me take you guys back to February when I had my initial EEG scan. It showed that I had two dominant brain waves. I had two alpha waves. One was functioning at a lower wave and one was functioning pretty high. And the goal was to merge them together or get the lower one to join my other high alpha peak so that I had more because I was lacking focus. I was having a really hard time focusing on tasks, focusing on projects, getting one thing done at a time. And I was 11 months, 10 months postpartum and going through this whole new stage. So I didn't know like how I could improve my brain. But that was my goal coming in, was to increase my focus so that I could really show up more in my family, be more present, and accomplish the dreams on my heart. And when they read it back to me, that's what they told me. They go, it looks like you lack focus. But when you are able to pull in focus, because I have the two peaks constantly battling for attention. But when I am able to come into a complete state of focus, I'm able to execute very quickly and very efficiently at a very fast speed. And another big takeaway that I got on my initial EEG reading, and we're going to tell you guys the results here in a second after my treatment, but it was that I process very fast information at a very fast rate. So sometimes people can be talking very slow, and I'm in my brain like, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. I'm already like 10 steps ahead, which can make me feel impatient or make me come across as impatient. And I can definitely feel impatient, but I process information very fast and Yeah. And I can have a hard time in some conversations when people speak really slow. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, your memory is spot on. You do have a fast processing brain, very high functioning, and so what we had observed is there may have been some disruption in the front, and we had talked about this waveform pattern can emerge from a variety of different conditions or exposures. Perhaps in this instance, given some of the life events that had happened. Not unlike some of the post-traumatic stress cases that we see.
mhm.
But we had talked about coherence. This is there was a little bit of a change in coherence, and that was specifically what we were trying to tune up or optimize. And this is it's always fascinating. It's we had some in-depth conversations, and it makes me think of there's a composer's musician, Leonard Cohen, who his most famous quote is, "There's a crack in everything. Through the crack comes the light." And
Mhm.
I think what he's trying to share is that we're all sort of broken and beautiful simultaneously. This is our condition in life. And this is, I think, sometimes truth follows art. And we see that in these EEGs that very rarely, if ever, do we see a perfectly intact brain. And some of the challenges in life, whether it's um, a loved one passing away or some significant trauma that occurs, or even kind of years of chronic sleep deprivation from working too hard,
Mm.
we see some of these neurons start to misfire. And that's where, even though you were blessed with a really high functioning brain, we saw some of these neurons that were misfiring that we could tune up. I recently learned about there's this um, form of art also in Japan called kintsugi, spelled Kintsugi, where when a piece of ceramic, whether it's a bowl or a cup, breaks, they use gold to bring it back together. And
Mm.
interestingly, the value of that ceramic actually goes up after it's been repaired like that. And so it's
Wow.
not unlike, this, what may have been shards of a broken vessel now becomes this beautiful work of art. And it's not unlike ourselves, that we have agency, we have the ability always to remake ourselves into something more beautiful and more glorious. And I think that's sometimes the opportunity that we lose sight of or that we miss. And, I thought that was a fascinating cultural exercise I hadn't been aware of until very recently. So, but kind of this idea that I've talked to a lot of post traumatic stress cases, both in the military and through our practice. And I always want to share with them that none of this, by any stretch, would reflect being broken. We just bend a little bit, and we can always come back in a stronger, more resilient form.
Wow, that was so beautifully said. I was
Yeah,
just journaling this morning about that, where, it can be so hard to overcome these challenges in life, right? But when we're able to climb to the top of the mountain and look down, we can really appreciate the beauty and the gifts that we were given in those moments. And sometimes it can be hard to, when we're in the pain, to feel the joy and see the gifts. But they're there. They're always there, and when we can hold on to those, we can really empower ourselves to, I mean, really just love our life and live a life that we're really proud of.
absolutely. Yeah, that's. I think if there's one message for the audience, first and foremost, it would be a message of hope. Um, uh, there's so much innovation that's occurring right now, and so much knowledge being gained day to day and week to week in terms of neuroscience. Um, for anyone who may be struggling, there's great reason for hope just based on the science that's starting to emerge. But also in our day to day life, it is hard sometimes to take a step back and to recognize all the things we should be appreciative for,
Mhm.
and that we're blessed with. And kind of circling back to that whole premise of gratitude, um, it's hard. Yeah, I know. There are days when it feels like the pressures of day to day life can be overwhelming, and it's only when we step back and, to your point, look at that 10,000 foot view that we can
Yeah.
appreciate sort of our situation, our circumstance, and how fortunate we are.
Yeah, and I think we need to remember that we can always climb that ladder. The mountain's always there, and that's really where it comes down to taking personal responsibility to do the work, to have that element of awareness where we can go peek up and look down. And I think going through my brain treatments, that really taught me and made me feel really empowered that, hey, just because I was lacking focus, lacking some patience, and had this brain fog, it didn't mean that I had to continue to suffer. I could do something about it. I could seek out mentors like you. I could work with professionals. I could get on a protocol. I could make the changes. I didn't have to continue to go through my life suffering. And coming out is what I want to share. That message, I think, is our big overall message, is that, you know, our bodies, our mind, our brains, our spirits are here to evolve and grow and want to be nurtured and attended to, and really deserve that recognition for us to do that work and have that introspection, to be willing to look within instead of just cover symptoms, right? Instead of just continue to take Tylenol for the headache. Maybe there's something going on within the brain that it's crying out for us to acknowledge it. And yeah, that's been my experience working with you.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah,
Yes.
and you've done some amazing things since we last spoke. So
Yeah,
just heartfelt congratulations.
thank you. What's so cool is like getting my results. I remember, to come back to that, we met and it'd been I think only 2 weeks, and you thought it had been like my full protocol, had my whole 30-day program was done, and you were blown away by the results that we had seen. And you asked me, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing differently? And what I did, in case anyone goes and gets these brain treatments done with you, is that I sat in the quiet room. I didn't have conversations with the staff. I just sat, and when I felt those neurons firing, I was focusing on the goals I wanted to accomplish: launching this podcast, throwing my live event, launching my RxL community. And it's so amazing because here we are on the podcast with my community. And it's so amazing that that was just a way where I could bring and unite, like, the dreams on my heart, the dreams for my body, the dreams for my life, all together and integrate into building my future.
Yeah, it's amazing to see that really transform from kind of an idea and a goal into reality, and it's so exciting to see how far you've come in I think a relatively short time, particularly with kind of all the turbulence and noise around, whether it's COVID or the economic downturn. Like there's always things that are happening in life, and to achieve and accomplish goals it's never easy. It always takes work. So I know behind the scenes, these podcasts I think are deploying, but I know leading up to that, there was a whole lot of work and effort and grinding that had to take place. So um,
Mm-hmm.
it's fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, before I tell everyone where they can find you and work with you, can you please tell our listeners what is one step that they can take in the next 24 hours to optimize their brain?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the most important things that is accessible to everyone at no cost is really focusing on sleep. And it sounds simple, there's a little bit of nuance to it. But the emerging science here, particularly around circadian rhythm and establishing circadian rhythm, simple step that people can do is first thing in the morning, within an hour of waking up, just go outside and get natural sunlight. And what's happening here is you think about our ancestors, the first biological cue to wake up was actually natural sunlight. And there were two Nobel Prizes awarded for the discovery that 450 to 500 nanometer light, this blue spectrum light, when it touches your retina, there's a biological cascade a signal is sent through your retina to your suprachiasmatic nucleus and ultimately to your pineal gland to much later in the evening, roughly 14 to 16 hours later, um, to secrete melatonin to allow you to get into very deep sleep. And
Wow.
so, to really take advantage of this knowledge, first thing is to get blue light in the morning, outside, not behind glass. Most treated glass actually filters out blue spectrum light. So, being behind the windows of your house or being behind the windows of a car or an office doesn't count. You actually have to be outside getting natural sunlight. Um, and then later on in the evening, you have to listen to your body and your biology and start to wind down. And there's a lot more that goes into that, but the one tip I would give is to avoid blue light in the evening, avoiding screen time, let's say at around 7 o'clock, and then getting into bed. And I know this makes me very unpopular, but right around 10 o'clock is when that melatonin spike should be occurring. And at the first sign of nighttime somnolence and fatigue, if you're yawning, if you're getting tired, you've got about 30 minutes to get into bed. And if you do that, there's a higher probability that you'll get very deep, restful sleep. And we didn't go into too much. We could do a whole podcast on sleep. But in terms of the longevity piece, intuitively, I think we know that when we get more restful sleep, we function better. But it turns out, relative to cognitive decline and losing over years and decades of chronic sleep deprivation, it does do a fair amount of damage in terms of our ability to function. And so, if you want to invest in your long-term health and longevity, the one real tip I would give is to emphasize and really be vigilant to getting high quality sleep.
So would that look like you're saying at the first sign of feeling tired, you got 30 minutes to get in bed and sleep?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
ideally,
and
you're saying melatonin spikes around 10 p.m. So you'd want to be in bed preparing for sleep, or you would ideally want to be asleep by 10 p.m.
I would say getting into bed, trying to get into a sleep mode, and everyone's going to be a little bit different. If you wake up at 6, it may be a little bit earlier, 5 or 6. We typically think it's about 16 hours, and so you can do the math in your head. But there are times when you may start feeling really sleepy around 8 p.m. And so if you've got kids, like I think both of us have children, sometimes that's really hard to do. And so life marches on. We have to take care of our responsibilities.
Yes.
And some of those are non-negotiable, such as, taking care of our children. There may be other things to do, but there are a lot of things that are within our control that we don't have to do. You don't have to check that last email. You don't have to go on a Netflix binge. These things that we do to sabotage ourselves. I'm as guilty as anyone. But if we really want to be thoughtful about it, we need to protect that time and prioritize it so that we do get into bed. And if it's been more than 30 minutes, if you're at 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour, you don't need to ruminate on it or beat yourself up. It's okay, just to the greatest degree possible. If we start getting ourselves into a routine and a rhythm, our body starts to adapt. And most of the studies are telling us with between 3 and 5 days, if we follow a consistent routine of waking up and going to sleep at the same time, our circadian rhythm can reestablish. And there's different types of chronotypes. Some people are naturally they wake up and fall asleep at certain times. These are not sort of hard and fast rules. But if we're talking about 80 to 90% of the population, if we're just regimented and disciplined about the habits around our sleep, we can do really well. And I found for myself and my wife, my kids, when we got into that routine, everyone did a whole lot better.
Oh my good. I will tell you, with my daughter, especially in that newborn stage, I'm all about routines and schedules. And I know about clock genes and circadian rhythms, and I know babies aren't born with circadian rhythms. They need to develop, right? Because it's just all black in the womb. They don't know when it's light and when it's dark. And so they needed to develop those. And I know putting my daughter, like as soon as we would wake up, bring her outside. I'd immediately get her in natural light. And we just kind of started building her routine that way. Anyways, she started sleeping through the night at 5 weeks. And
Wow.
yeah, and still, there have been probably 5 days total since she was 5 weeks old that she hasn't slept through the night. And that's mostly been when we've traveled across the East Coast and in different time zones, but always back within like a night or two. She's like back on her routine. And baby's happy, mommy's happy, daddy's happy. Everyone's so much happier when we're getting good quality sleep. So I would love to have you back on the podcast to specifically dive into optimizing sleep for brain health. And in the meantime, Dr. Won, can you please tell our listeners how they can find you and how they can work with you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, our website is waveneuro.com, just how it sounds, waveneuro.com. And I believe we have Instagram and Facebook presence, and you can find us there. And our clinics, there's a separation between our technology company and our clinics. The clinics go by braintreatmentcenter.com. And there's a new group emerging called Brain Care Performance Centers, sort of true to this philosophy of moving towards really human performance and optimizing brain function. There's some rebranding, and so you can find us at those websites. And it's going to be an ongoing, I think, dynamic conversation. But we're always seeing new knowledge base emerge and new innovation. So it's fascinating and really exciting time to be in the space.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, I will be sure to link all of your information in the show notes below so you guys can just click it and find Dr. Won. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such an honor and privilege working together and having you support me on my journey of optimizing my brain to build out my dreams, my goals, and just design a life that I'm madly in love with. So, looking forward to connecting with you very soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, bye.